In March 2026, a series of missile strikes hit the Ras Laffan site in Qatar, effectively closing the Strait of Hormuz. This single disruption reduced Qatari output by 17%, severing the primary energy arteries for the global market. The suspension of these flows triggered an immediate shock to the global supply chain. As fuel grew scarce, the costs for agricultural inputs like urea and fertilizers surged, creating the immediate threat of widespread food insecurity and stagflation. Governments in the Asia-Pacific region responded with a series of administrative measures. They implemented expansive fiscal subsidies, strict price caps, and mandated reductions in industrial operating hours to shield their populations from the immediate inflationary shock. While these interventions provide temporary relief, macroeconomic data suggests they impose a high cost. By suppressing the price signals that normally dictate supply and demand, states are shifting the financial stress onto sovereign balance sheets, eroding the fiscal baseline required for long-term resilience. When populations fear scarcity, they engage in phantom ordering. This hoarding artificially inflates demand and entirely drains physical supply. Modern reserves are poorly equipped for this. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve was heavily utilized during political cycles, leaving it depleted as the 2026 crisis escalated. China took the opposite approach, absorbing massive volumes of crude during the mid-2020s. By consistently capturing over 1 million barrels of daily surplus, the state built a structural accumulation of physical commodities. This divergence shows that resource abundance functions as the foundational bedrock of a state's legitimacy. When a government can no longer guarantee the physical necessities of survival, the underlying social cohesion begins to fracture. During the warfare and famine of the Hundred Schools of Thought era, Confucian scholars developed a model for this kind of crisis governance. They called it the Junzi, the exemplary or moral leader. This model starts with the virtue of Ren, or benevolence. In a period of rationing, Ren dictates that the state's ultimate justification for power is the humane protection of the populace. It prioritizes securing basic necessities for the vulnerable to maintain human dignity despite the collapse of supply chains. Yi, or righteousness, provides the operational ethics for that distribution. It demands the enforcement of ethical pricing models to prevent predatory behavior, treating black market profiteering as a violation of the moral order rather than a simple economic crime. Technocratic competence is captured by the virtue of Ji, or wisdom. This is the ability to use empirical knowledge to foresee the ripple effects of a shock, recognizing, for example, how a closure in the Middle East will dictate food security months down the line. For a Junzi leader, managing a crisis is a public test of the mandate of heaven. By synthesizing these virtues into a clear policy, the state maintains the moral authority required to guide a society through protracted hardship. These principles were institutionalized through the Changpingcang, or Ever-Normal Granary system. Established during the Han Dynasty, it was designed to control agricultural prices and prevent mass famine through state intervention. During bumper harvests, the state purchased grain to remove excess supply, supporting prices to prevent a market crash. Conversely, during a bad harvest, the state released those stores at a controlled price, suppressing hyperinflation and thwarting private hoarders. By the Qing Dynasty, relief was managed through granular house-to-house canvassing, categorizing residents into grades of immediate need. The imperial authorities used the language of moral obligation to encourage local elites and wealthy merchants to fund these relief operations at the local level. This model suggests that governments cannot endlessly absorb the financial shock of a global crisis. Survival depends on transitioning from universal subsidies to a synergy where the private sector and local communities recognize a duty to the broader social order. In 2026, the Republic of Singapore faced this challenge with extreme vulnerability. As a city-state relying on imported natural gas for 95% of its electricity, it was directly in the path of the Qatari supply disruption. Singapore responded through the Homefront Crisis Ministerial Committee. This body institutionalized the virtue of Li, using established protocols and structured crisis committees to provide a predictable, orderly response to the shock. The government prioritized the virtue of Xin, or trustworthiness. Leaders engaged in unvarnished public communication, explicitly warning citizens that electricity prices would rise sharply and that food disruptions were an absolute inevitability. This transparency was backed by the foresight of Xi. Singapore had already initiated supply diversification, securing LNG from sources like Mozambique and Australia to ensure its internal distribution grid remained stable despite the regional chaos. By fulfilling its civic promises and maintaining a just baseline of operation, Singapore avoided the social unrest seen in neighboring states. The state's moral authority functioned as a tangible economic buffer. The use of digital tools to enforce these norms presents a significant hazard. Systems that track household energy or enforce commercial quotas risk becoming tools of surveillance that crush individual autonomy if they are not strictly bounded by the public good. However, the Confucian concept of the relational self provides a unique layer of resilience. Research into disaster survival shows that strong social ties within a community are significantly more effective at securing resources than state intervention alone. Public messaging can reinforce this by drawing on the Zongyong, or the Doctrine of the Mean. This philosophy defines moral excellence as the achievement of internal equilibrium and moderation, which empirical studies show can culturally suppress the urge to panic buy. When moderation is internalized as a civic duty, the community self-organizes. Stronger members naturally provision for the elderly and the sick, creating a decentralized safety net that functions without the need for coercive state mandates. To survive the structural scarcity of the 21st century, the most effective tools are the ones that have always managed instability. The ancient practice of moral leadership and human interconnectedness remains the primary defense against chaos.